Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode in the series. My name is Dominic and I'm the host of the Android Factory. In the previous episode we added a seek bar to the application here, allowing the user to very easily change the quantity of their item that they're selecting at this moment in time, with also the idea of when they are resuming something here from, or editing something, sorry, the seek bar will automatically be set to the appropriate amount based on what exists inside of those little square brackets. So if you missed that, definitely go back and check it out. I'll link a card in the top right now. And if you're coming from there, thanks for sticking with me. I know that was a little bit longer of an episode. But today, in today's episode, I'm going to show you another benefit of Kotlin and something called the Kotlin Extensions. And it's a pretty helpful tool, and it's going to set us up for something that exists in the future here, or that I want to do in the future, probably the next episode. So we have here a header layout, right? If you remember, this entire thing is an EpoxyController here, and these different view types are managed by our logic in the EpoxyController here. So we can see here we have a loading epoxy model, the empty state epoxy model, the header epoxy model, and then the item entity epoxy model. And those last two we are seeing here in the list, where these are all item entities, and then these are the headers. I'm going to want to reuse these headers basically in the profile screen when we get to building that out. So we could very easily make the header epoxy model that exists inside of here, a class outside of the outside of this EpoxyController and make it its own file and then reuse that file, but we can go even a step further. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do the first part of that, which is just create we're going to create just a new package here, just because it's a good idea. Create the models package, and then here we're going to create the header epoxy model. And then we're just going to go ahead and boom, just paste that in, and then this, all we got to do is import this one, and then everything's back to normal, right? So we could basically do this logic here in any of our epoxy models that we want to use this header, and so it's really not that bad, right? It's literally just text here, but we can go even a step further, make it even easier, and that's exactly what the extensions is going to do. So inside of, I guess let's put it inside the, you know what, no, we'll put it in the root package here. We're going to go ahead and create a file. And can we even do it? Oh, yeah, so we can create a file from here. So I'm just going to name this 2by extensions.kt. And this is a little funky because all of our other classes or interfaces or data classes or abstract classes all have the class annotation on them, or the abstract class or the data class or the inner class or interface, whatever, right? It has some kind of keyword to kind of kick things off here. And that is part of the reason where these icons end up coming from. And you can see this one just looks like a normal text file. This one is an XML file, etc. So we actually don't need to go ahead and use one of those keywords, and instead we can define a function that exists on an object that we have created, or a native object or primitive type variable. So if we go in here and say function EpoxyController dot add header model, and we need here the header text, I believe, right? Yep. And that's really all that we need, right? So we're just going to say header text string, and that's it. So it's a little weird, but we're creating basically just a file that contains functions, and these functions exist on a particular object, right? You can do this on a string, you can do this on an integer, You can do it on the item entity that we have in our data, inside of our project. But in this case, we're actually going to do it on the Epoxy controller itself, and you'll see why in a second. So basically, we can go ahead and take this exact implementation right here, add it right here. Instead of text, we're going to call it header text. And then inside of our Epoxy controller, instead of having to actually worry about this implementation, even though it's simple, we can very easily just say add header model text. And we could take it, I guess, a step further and inline that variable. So now we don't have to, so it just makes things a little bit cleaner, right? And you can see the IDE picks this up as kind of, an extension function, if you will, very similar to how this sort by descending ends up working, or there's, for each, or a whole handful, find, a whole handful of these either inline functions or extension functions. Yeah, here's the for each, right? So we've basically gone ahead and added in a custom one. So you can see the definition here, public inline function for sort by descending that exists on the collections.kt. So you can see if we scroll all the way up, like this is just a file that exists that has functions inside of it. It doesn't actually have any class annotation or interface annotation or anything along those lines. And then you can command click into it, of course, and you'll go ahead and move to this implementation here. And at this point, basically inside this block of code, you are running as if you are inside of an Epoxy controller, inside of that object, right? So imagine being inside of an apply block, you are inside of whatever object you're running that apply block on, and so therefore you can operate and you can call, this, and the code will have a context of what this actually is. In this case, the keyword this is referring to an Epoxy controller because we are within an Epoxy controller class here, right? We are in the home Epoxy controller, which extends the Epoxy controller base class. We have this additional function provided to us. So it's basically a way for us to create functions on objects that are not our own, right? Which is a super convenient thing to do. And on top of it, when when the IDE goes ahead and compiles everything, the compiled code does not actually make a function call here. It will instead actually just basically copy what code it runs inside of this method and pastes it right here. And then everything is, moves on from there. And that might sound silly, but under the hood, it's actually a benefit to us as developers, to specifically Kotlin developers, because it is not making another function call. And if you understand how function calls work at a lower level, you don't have to perform this branching logic. You do not have to perform, navigate away from this this linear flow of execution and jump to a new location and add that function call onto the stack, and then pop it once you get off of the stack and return from this function call. So it's convenient under the hood to know that basically this is just like a wrapper around being able to have some more explicit code running inside of here, right? Because we can have this be, a function that's 40 lines long, but in our implementation, it's really just one line long, very easy to, very quick entry point, and then the compilation process will go ahead and put all of that into place for us, and we don't have to really look at it as 40 lines here. We only need to look at it as one, and everything works the same. So just to prove that to you, I'm going to go ahead and run this really quickly, and of course we actually had to go ahead and import that. We had to import the add header model here, which is just, exists in a file that exists at the top, the root of our project here. So if we go ahead and run things again, we can see that our header model is working as expected, the code has compiled correctly, is not crashing, all that kind of stuff, and so everything is good and well. So yes, we could have just very simply copied and pasted this code, or it's a simple implementation, but the extension functions are extremely helpful. It is something new in Kotlin. At least when I left Java, it was most definitely not present. And it will set us up nicely to essentially have a standard way of inside of an epoxy controller for us to add a header model that we are looking for here to kind of separate different sections in the UI. So we're going to make use of that in our profile fragment here, where we're going to go ahead and build out some other some other regions or some other areas that the user can customize certain aspects of the application. So slightly different video in the sense that we didn't really make progress on the application, but under the hood we've introduced a new way of doing something, a new way to basically standardize this header model being added to our epoxy controller. And then obviously the good news is, if we were to, for some reason, update this header model, as long as we update things in this function here instead of all of the places that we're calling this code, everything will, all of the header models will reflect that change, which is just brilliant. So hopefully you learned a thing or two. If you did, if you made it this far, please drop a like, subscribe for more if you're not already, and I'll catch you in the next one.